Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Bainbridge Island Senior Center Something to Talk About program. These programs are held Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays on Zoom and are being recorded for those who would like to view this at a later date on our YouTube page. The Something to Talk About programs are sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers memory care, independent living, assisted living, in addition to day stay and respite programs on the beautiful campus located in Rolling Bay. For more information, please call 360-594-1010 to get a tour or learn more. We would also like to acknowledge that we are gathering on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived on the water of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We honor them and are grateful for their hospitality, OCM. So today we are talking about gardening, and we have the lovely Anne Lovejoy to lead us in this discussion. It looks like we're going to be chatting about late summer harvests, as well as preserving fruits and vegetables, and possibly talk about delicious seasonal recipes.
Well, yeah.
So, with that being said, I'll hand it on over to Miss Anne.
Thanks, Lena. And, one thing we're definitely going to talk about a little bit is watering, because, oh my gosh, it is so hot and dry out there, right? That's something to really think about, because we are so used to having those misty mornings, those marine layer mornings, but they haven't been around for the last week or two. And while we're up in the 80s and the night temperatures are climbing, those plants really do need more irrigation than they usually get, even in our dry summers, because it's that combination of hotter days, warmer nights. That means that we're just not getting the same kind of coddling that the plants usually get to ease them through the hotter days. So being sure you water well and try to keep it off the foliage, no matter what the plant is, because one thing about warm, humid days is they're perfect incubators for all kinds of foliage diseases like powdery mildew and black spot and all that kind of stuff. One good thing about the drier heat that we're getting in the afternoons is we haven't had as much problem with like black spot on roses as we often do. So that's a bonus. But looking at these really fairly difficult days, I think if you want to pander your plants a little bit, you want to really give them that extra attention. Make sure you're looking at them. If they're floppy in the high sun in the high afternoon, that might be okay as long as they perk up when the sun gets off them. If they look okay in the evening or in the early morning, they're getting enough. That's just a protection. But if they stay floppy, that means they're really kind of needing more water. And especially for big things in containers, you really want to watch that. And that's why I often talk about getting those really big saucers and putting big containers in a saucer so you can bottom water as well as top water. And that way make sure that the plants gets enough, it stays moist, has enough of a moist root zone to keep them from flagging like that, sagging and flagging. They look so sad. Now, what you don't want to do is leave it so much water in those saucers that you start breeding mosquitoes. So one thing I always have done is get a turkey baster, which honest to God, I don't use for turkey, but I sure use it in my pots. And you can take the water out of the saucers, suck it up and put it on a dry plant, right? And then you're just recycling that water, but you're not leaving enough there to encourage raccoons to come in and wash their food in it or breed guppies or whatever else could happen in there. Who knows, right? And by the way, so for Anita, Barbara, and anyone else who wants to show up, please jump in if you have questions, because you know me, I can talk all day, but it's nice if I know what you're wondering about and thinking about. One thing I was going to talk about is something that Lena and I have been talking about recently, is that I make these herb salts in the summer, and this is the time I do it, because you gather the garlic, and right now I'm gathering a lot of garlic that's been growing since, some of it since last fall, and some of it was planted like in February or March, and it's getting nice and fat now. And so when the garlic stems start to collapse, you stop watering, just like onions, and let them dry out a little bit, and then pull them, and you can braid the stems or whatever, but dry those bulbs out really nice. And if you've chosen the keeper types, they really will keep. You can get a dozen going and you'll have them for several months. But they're the soft neck ones don't last very long. So make sure you know what kind you have, because it's very disappointing if you gather up all your garlic and carefully store it and then open it up and find out it's turned to mush or sprouted, right? But one thing we were doing, talking about, is making garlic salt. And I really love my homemade versions of herb salts and garlic salts, especially when you look at the grocery store and see those fancy ones are like 12 bucks a bottle. Well, you can go out in your yard, and I usually make a mixture of rosemary and garlic, sometimes with a little organic lemon peel in there too, or some pepper. Um, and sometimes I'll just make an herb blend. I'll pick 2 cups full of, like, say, oregano and thyme and maybe some sage and a little rosemary, and fill up the cup more heavy on the things like oregano and thyme and rosemary, and maybe just a little sage, because a little sage goes a long way. And maybe if you like dill, you could make a dill mix too. And then I match cup for cup. So if there's a cup of herb snippets, I'll put a cup of um, coarse kosher salt. And I don't use sea salt anymore because it's got so much plastic in it. It's really sad. But you put them in your food uh, Cuisinart or whatever you have, food processor, grind them up together, and you can put in, I usually would put like as much as a whole head of garlic peeled, of course, if it's not a real big head. If it's a really big head, I'd probably use half. But 5 or 6 nice big fat cloves to 2 cups of herbs and 2 cups of salt. And don't be afraid you're making too much, because you are not. You'll be amazed. Am I right, Lena? This stuff gets used up so fast, right? Anyway, you grind it all up and it turns kind of greenish if you've used a lot of herbs, or a little yellowish if you used a lot of garlic and some lemon peel. And then you spread it in a rimmed baking sheet. And I do this in the early morning because I don't like to turn the oven on in the heat of the day. And you bake it at 225 for about 15 or 20 minutes. And you spread it out even as you can, so that you don't have high spots and low spots. And what happens is, as you take it out, you can hit it with a spatula and it will kind of break in sheets. It's like it gets crunchy. And so, oh, and I forgot to say, don't wash your food processor, because now you're going to put that salt back in there and buzz it again, because break up all those chunks. And while you often forget and wash it, and then you have to wait till it dries or carefully hand dry the whole thing, and it's so annoying. So don't wash your processor, but grind out that stuff, bake it off, chunk it up, buzz it up again, and now it's shelf stable for at least 6 months. And that's pretty cool. And I get those little glass bottles with a shaker top, and the ones that have a little metal top that you can screw on are really nice, because those really help preserve the flavor, and it's not evaporating, or whatever you want to say. But they make great gifts. Like, people really love this stuff, and you can use it in so many ways. Like, I always put it on vegetables, or even like with scrambled eggs or anything like that. And Lena, I know you've used it quite a bit too. What do you do with it?
I was just going to say, to back up a little bit, you mentioned it's a 6-month shelf life. In all reality, 6 days in my family is about the length of time that lasts, because all it took was each one of them to try it, my family members to try it, whatever they were cooking, eggs, meat, vegetables, whatever, and they were hooked. And so, yeah, my family absolutely loved it from the get-go. And so we literally, on everything, I've actually had a family member use it at the table
Yeah.
while we were eating,
Yeah.
a gentle seasoning.
So I use it on sandwiches. Like, if I was making tuna sandwich or something, you'd put a
Salads.
little in there.
Yeah.
My parts of my family use it on popcorn all the time. My
Yeah.
dentist will not allow me to eat popcorn anymore because it's really hard on your teeth. But it's really good for all that kind of snacky stuff, and anything savory at all. It's really, really delicious.
Yes.
So yeah, you're right. It doesn't last all that long, but what's great is you can make a pretty big batch and put it on the shelf and know that it'll be just as good when you pull out the second and third jar, right? I had a really good time playing with that a few years ago, and I was making all kinds of interesting combinations with, like, a salt mix that had cumin seeds and fennel seeds and fennel pollen and all that kind of stuff. And again, you're going to pay $15, $20 for salt like that. Whereas you go in your garden, the fennel's all blooming right now. You take an envelope out there, tap the fennel heads, you've got $50 worth of fennel pollen in about 1 minute. And if you don't have any, you come on over because I do, right? One fennel plant will give you all you ever need. But I think stuff like that is so fun. And the seeds you can use fennel seeds off your plant rather than buying them at the grocery store, and all that kind of stuff. Um, it does best if you want to keep it. You have more than you want, and you want to use it again later. Put it in a glass container and with a dry little bit of paper towel to absorb any extra moisture, and then I freeze it. And that keeps it for a long time, and then it won't get wet, it won't get moldy, it won't get funky, and it'll be just. And usually, it's little bits. Um, you can fill one of those small glass bottles and put it in the freezer, and it'll be good for months. So yeah, that's one of my favorite go-to. Oh, that was the other thing we did that was so yummy, was we made kind of like, well, we took basil and and white peppercorns and with garlic and crunched that up and made the salt out of that. And oh my gosh, it's so good because sort of that sweet hot, really nice.
Question, when you were talking about the, you're harvesting all these wonderful seasonings to make the seasoning salt, is this all year, or are we talking just this time of the year moving into fall?
Yeah, so most of the herbs are best harvested now. Like um, they're at their peak of flavor, really, in this high summer. And those are plants you don't want to water too much because they will get diluted. Their flavor gets diluted if you overwater them. But things like rosemary, you can do all year round, no problem, because it's evergreen. And I've made rosemary salt in the middle of winter and it's fine. But things like mint, if you wanted to use mint and stuff, and you can do this with sugar too, by the way. You can make like mint sugar or vanilla bean sugar, right? In similar way. But anyway, if you're using fresh herbs for teas or anything like that, this is a really good time to harvest them. Now, around here with our mild winters, a lot of the herbs that are like parsley, you'll still find parsley almost all year, unless it gets really cold and you get one of those 17-degree deep freezes. You'll still have stuff to pick, a little, not a ton. And things like my calendula petals, which I gather all year round, most of the time, they just keep going. Even roses will produce, like if you like to use rose petals in a salad, which I think is so pretty and it smells really nice, or a little on a cupcake or something like that. You can do that all through the year as long as you're not using any pesticides on those plants, right? Also, things like thyme, sage, those will be all year round. You can harvest some of that too. They'll be most powerful and most delicious in the high summer, but they're still pretty darn good for an omelet or something like that. Now chives die down in the winter, so those, if you want to use those, like you can make chive salt if you want, which is really yummy. That you would either dry them or then I'd freeze them after that. Or you can bring a little club or two in and have them on a windowsill and they'll keep going that way. And just use scissors and snip off one or two, and then they've got those hollow stems, right? And you just snip them with scissors into your omelet and they'll keep going for quite a long time. Chives are like a bunch of little bulbs. So if you dig up a clump of chives, you'd have 100 maybe. So if you made a few pots with 10 in each, you can keep cycling them through. Does that make sense?
Oh, and do you use nasturtiums at all for this?
Nasturtiums, mostly what I use them for, they're really pretty, but those flowers are kind of big and it's quite a mouthful. I mean, I might use them to be decorative, but what I really like is the leaves. And a lot of people, it's like almost like watercress. So if you, of course you want to rinse them, but I chop them up into a salad, a fresh salad. Right now, cucumbers and fresh tomatoes, right? And if you put nasturtium, the chopped foliage into that salad, that really adds a nice kind of peppery quality that's really spunky.
Okay, I'll try it.
And lemon balm, is another one that's kind of fun to, like I put lemon balm and mint and a little basil into a fruit salad, just chopped up in kind of a little chiffonade, like ribbons. and throw that with some fresh fruit. And sometimes when I've been getting, like, I picked a lot of raspberries and some of them were kind of pretty getting soft. Well, I put all those in a container and froze them because they weren't going to last another minute, right? But then you can pull it out and they're still fresh in a lot of ways, and just put them in a salad dressing. And it makes this really woof, right? I use my freezer a lot for all kinds of things besides, I mean, the other thing my freezer is full of right now is shredded zucchini and squash and green beans. And I have my Cuisinart has one of those a coarse grater that makes like string strips, really, pretty much. And so when I get a bunch of squash and things like that, I'll zoop it all in the Cuis and then freeze it. And I know you're supposed to blanch it, but what I've discovered is if you're going to use it in soup or a stir fry, you don't really have to, especially if you're going to use it fairly soon, like within 3 or 4 months. I don't know that I'd keep it for a year and think it was going to be just as good. But the point of blanching is to halt the bacterial activity. But I found, grinding it up and putting it in the freezer immediately, it's still fine 3 months later, 4 months later. And it really makes a difference to your, like a stir fry or a casserole. You can throw them in at the last minute, barely cook, and they still have that fresh quality, which is really nice. And I have found there's a certain kind of ice cream. Now, I wouldn't just buy ice cream for no reason, but because it's a very good container to reuse, I feel like it's my civic duty to buy that one. And they click really smart, really sharp. So you do have to relabel them or it's super disappointing when you go digging around your freezer, right? And you're like, oh, right. But it's a great way to do tomatoes too. Like if you don't really feel like dealing with a whole lot of tomatoes right now, you can puree a bunch of them, shove them in the freezer, and they'll, I have a dedicated ice cube tray too. It's one of those ones somebody gave me that has a silicone flap. And so you can fill the ice cube tray, put the flap down so it's not picking up any stray, or, God forbid your freezer should smell a little off, but some of them do. And then freeze them good and then put them in a container. And that way you can just add 1 or 2 of the frozen, like a cube, to whatever you're making, a sauce or a salad dressing, just enough, right? But you don't need to thaw a whole quart or whatever it is, because you're maybe not going to use that much. So I do that with like grinding up basil and walnuts, because I use that instead of pine nuts for pesto. Don't put the garlic in if you're going to freeze it, because it changes quite a bit and it gets off flavors really easily when it's frozen. But if you grind that up with some oil, and I usually use avocado oil because it has less, it's less, what would you say? It has a really warm, buttery flavor, but it doesn't overtake the way olive oil can. And olive oil is another thing that can kind of change in the freezer a little, get a little overtone of rankness. So avocado oil, a bunch of basil leaves, a bunch of whatever nuts you like or seeds, grind that up, put them in your, and it has to be a dedicated ice cube container, because I gotta say, it's never the same. Like you're not going to go back to iced tea with this. But then that way you save that kind of essence of summer flavor. And it's really fun to be able to have that splash of summer in a dressing or on a sauce down the road. Barbara, you're muted.
Do you use walnuts in place of pine nuts for any particular reason?
Yeah,
Is
a
it
couple
personal
reasons.
preference or, okay.
Yeah, well, for one thing, walnuts are one of the nuts that are even the, the National Health Department says it's good for aging brains. And I definitely have an aging brain. So my doctor even said, if you're going to snack, you might consider toasting some nuts and having a snack of, get this, walnuts, pecans, and peanuts. Break my heart, right? Instead of some of the, a handful of pretzels or something. Well, so I have a recipe for that too. But the reason I do that with the pesto is because pine nuts are so expensive and they're actually not sustainably harvested in a lot of situations. Okay. So, you can do pumpkin seeds. I've done that with pepitas. They're certainly sustainably harvested. There are tons of them. And, you can get organic ones and use those instead. And they still give you they give you lots of protein too. All seeds are basically very high protein, very low carbs. So that's another good snackerino thing if you're gonna, right? if you need a nibble, that's a good one to have. But if
Great,
you,
thank you.
yeah, if you take those nuts and throw them in a bowl with just a little, again, maybe tablespoon of avocado oil to 3 or 4 cups of nuts, and stir them all around, and then shake in a little, like cumin is one thing I like to use, maybe a little bit of chili powder, or maybe you want to go another way and do sort of lemon, garlic,
Okay.
whatever you want. And then you bake those off for 15 or 20 minutes at 300. And boy, that's an amazing snack. And it's actually pretty healthy. Like a 1/4 cup, which is more than you would think, right? And the other thing that helps is getting little bowls.
Yes.
You don't want to pour a 1/4 cup in a big cereal bowl. It looks kind of lonesome. But if you have a little cup, it looks so generous, right?
Great.
I did find that container. I don't know if you guys can see this, probably not so much on the
Oh,
the
yeah.
camera, but the glass container maybe for those who are viewing this later, because I don't know about you, but I do find taste of anything is different out of glass than it is a plastic.
Definitely.
So this is definitely a keeper for sure.
And those containers, you can get them at Town and Country, and they're way up on the top shelf above the bulk herbs, and they're dishwasher washable, which is nice. So you can run them through, and if you're changing flavors or whatever, you don't want any rancid stuff in there, but that's nice because you can use them over and over and over. I have some that I've used for years. And yeah, I know people like to reuse those plastic ones, but honestly, the glass is a better deal.
So, and I had another question, this is sort of a bigger question. So I've got a lot of collard greens, so we're coming to the end of that. I'll be cooking those up, but it feels like we're going to have an early fall to me. The spiders are all out earlier than usual, I think. And I see some color on trees, on the maple trees a little bit. So given that it feels like we're going to have early fall, what should I be thinking about planting?
Well, honestly, I don't think you should be thinking about planting anything just yet, because it's still going to be like according to NOAA, it's going to be hot and dry well through September, probably.
Oh, gosh.
So that means, boy, really challenging to get little baby starts going.
Okay.
But I will also say that August is always spider month, right? Like when I had a bigger garden, I used to always, in August, you'd carry a stick and swish it in front of you to knock all the spider webs down so you didn't get in the face. I hate that when you're walking around and you're wearing somebody's web. It's no fun. But yeah, there are a lot of spiders out. There are definitely a lot of trees on the turn, but partly that's also the drought. We are still in a state of drought. We are no longer in an extreme state of drought, or at least last I heard. We may be edging back toward it, but one thing, of course, that trees will do when they feel threatened, or the changing season, start going dormant, especially deciduous trees, because they can't afford to carry all those leaves and need all that nutrient requirement. And of course, when the leaves are turning, what you're seeing is the stored sugars in them. Those colors are the sugars that they've been storing all summer. The chlorophyll starts getting fed back into the tree, and the leaves are still holding the sugar and a lot of the nutrients. So when they fall, the best thing you can do for them, if you're able, is shred them up and put them right back where they fell, because they're designed by nature to feed that plant.
Okay.
Even pulling them apart and composting them and putting them back, that's good too. But if you actually have the ability, like you got a big enough place and you've got trees and stuff, try to leave the leaves, because it's the best thing you can do for your plants. Doesn't hurt the soil any either to have that nice layer of leaves slowly composting in sight, right?
It's also felt like, and maybe I'm just noticing it for the first time, there's always that possibility, but it's felt like it's been really windier than usual this year. And so the tree leaves have been sounding drier for a while now.
Well, and they are drier, and there's also still some, already, I guess I should say, there's smoke in that wind. And one of the things we know is we have not had as bad smoke season this year so far, cross your fingers, but so smoke on foliage clogs them up, and they start closing their little windows, their stoma, so that they don't absorb air, they don't capture the nitrogen out of the air as well. They don't get moisture as well. And of course they are drying out, right?
Mhm.
So, and yeah, you're right. It has been a lot windier. That's part of the El Nino cycle that, or the Southern Oscillation cycle, definitely been windier. The interesting part about this, when we start getting really smoky air quality is that actually there's a lot of nutrients in that smoke too. And so you want to wash your foliage if it gets covered with it later. Like I said, we haven't had it bad yet, but
Mhm.
mornings I've noticed that we've had quite a bit of different air quality measures in the last few weeks. Um, but if you want to wash your foliage off at least once a week in the morning so that it has a chance to dry really well throughout the day,
Mhm.
that will help it be much more functional. Of course, you can't really do that with a great big tree, but you can certainly do it with your plants around, the house or in your patio and stuff like that. Um, but in the longer run, some of that ash and stuff that comes does actually increase soil nutrient quality.
Hmm.
I know. Some studies were done in California after the whole, God knows they've had a horrible series of fires, and found that they weren't seeing the nutrient loss they were looking for. In fact, they saw in some cases some nutrient gain. Just like the grape growers after Mount St. Helens blew up had some fantastic years because all that ash was full of minerals.
Hmm.
I know, it's weird.
Hmm. And we have some volunteer trees at one edge of our property. So there's no watering system set up. Should we be watering them to help them as we've gotten hotter, or what do you think?
What kind of trees?
Birch. I'm sorry.
Oh, birch. Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so birch trees, if they're native river birch, they're probably okay. If they're seedlings of the especially super white Himalayan birches,
Mm-hmm.
they are more thirstier. And one of the things that happens with them if they get drought stricken is they get really susceptible to the bronze birch borer. Get tied over that one. And you can see a lot of birches are all around town. They're starting to die at the top. You look and you'll see, even at City Hall, right in front of City Hall, the one is basically dead, and 2 or 3 of the other birches there are almost gone. And the one at Eagle Harbor Church, you can see that the whole top is dead. It's very common with trees that are drought stressed, birch trees particularly. So yeah, if they're beautiful and they're well placed, you might want to give them a little water. Remember that when you're watering a tree, the active feeding roots are not at the trunk.
They're out.
They're out at the drip line where the rain would fall off, right?
Okay.
And of course, if they're at the edge and they might be somewhat under, pavement or whatever, who knows?
Yep.
So then you don't have access to as much of it as you can, but you can, one thing, if anyone drinks wine in a box and admits it, those boxes make great. You can refill them, and they have like a little spigot sort of thing, right?
Mhm.
And you set it to drip, and they'll deliver a gallon on each side, dink, 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 slow and steady. And then you don't have to stand there because no one has the patience. I don't
Right.
know how much you meditate. Nobody has the patience to really water the way we're supposed to.
Okay, thanks.
If you don't have that, one thing you can also do is take a regular gallon jug and punch a hole in the bottom and cover it with duct tape, and then fill it with water, and then you flip it over and kind of screw it into the ground by around its little neck. You know how they have a smaller neck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dig it into the ground until it sits upright, full of water, and then you pull the tape off or pull it back, and it will, that too will do a slow glug. And that's really good if you have like a fairly new rose bush or a young tree that's been transplanted, and you want to make sure those plants should be getting like 4 to 5 gallons of water a week in this kind of weather. And again, really hard to make sure that happens unless you have some kind of system like this. I did want to give you one recipe that's my summertime favorite, and I want to give it to you right now because nectarines are on sale, and this is like the high of the season. And I make a lot of different kinds of vinegar for salad dressings and stuff.
Mm.
The one that most people like the best, and the one that I like the best, is my nectarine vanilla bean vinegar. Oh my gosh, it's so good on beets and stuff like that. It's fantastic on salads, green salads, even on fruit salads. And it's great if you like splash a little on grilled salmon or chicken. It's just so delicious. It's crazy, right? So you take about 3 nectarines cut up so that it makes a couple cups. And I don't take their peel skin off or anything like that. I just wash them really good and chop them up. And then 1 vanilla bean split but not cut up. And I put in 2 cups of cider vinegar and about 1/3 of a cup of water and maybe a 1/4 cup of, well, sugar or honey. I kind of like honey because it has that real warm flavor. Anyway, you combine all that stuff and bring it to a boil, and then immediately reduce it to a medium low so it kind of simmers for about 5 minutes. And then you remove it from the heat, let it stand covered for another 5 or 10 minutes, and then pour it into a clean jar, cover it again, and let it cool to room temperature. And then you refrigerate it overnight or maybe up to 36 hours. And then you strain it into a clean bowl through a fine sieve, or I use a couple layers of muslin cheesecloth
Mhm,
to get at the
mhm.
grocery store. And you press really gently because you want to get the liquid out, but you don't want to press so much that you get a lot of the particulate stuff,
Mhm, mhm.
right? And then you pour the liquid into a clean bottle, seal it, and store it in the refrigerator for up to 3 months. And you can use the vanilla bean and rinse it really good and put it in the bottle if you want to, or if you make enough, that's makes about 2 cups. If you make a bigger batch, you can cut the vanilla bean in half and put each in one. Um, but you do have to keep it in the refrigerator because there's enough stuff in there that I wouldn't trust it on the shelf. But oh my gosh,
Mhm.
that is the most amazing, delicious. And I've tried different kinds of vinegar. Like I made it with rice vinegar one year, but it just wasn't spunky. It was too mild.
And
And
how much water did you say?
I put in about 1/3 of a cup. You could do more, but you want it to be like with any of these fruit vinegars, they're not like vinegar. You can organic cider vinegar sit on your shelf for 3 years. It's just fine. All it does is get more of the mother of vinegar at the bottom. But once you start putting fruit and stuff into it, that's when it gets a little sketchy as far as preserving. Um, but this stuff also makes really good what they used to call shrub, which is like if you took, a 1/4 cup of this or even a few tablespoons and mixed it with some seltzer water, it makes a very refreshing drink on
Mm.
a, right? And you can do that with you can do it with cherries too, like dark pie cherries. Pit those in and cook them exactly the same way with some organic cider vinegar. And that also makes just a really, I don't usually put the vanilla bean in that. For some reason, it doesn't do the same thing, but sometimes I'll put a little
Mm.
bit of organic orange peel in there. Just the zest, take
Mhm.
a vegetable scraper and take some curls of organic orange peel and add that. And that, to me, that's a nice combination. I don't like a lot of the bought fruit vanilla vinegars because they're so sweet. And a lot of the
Mm.
recipes would have like a cup of sugar in there, which is, you don't want that. But it's true, you want enough to kind of wake up that flavor and make it really punchy. One thing I was going to talk a little about too that was dahlias, because we went to the dahlia farm on last Friday here on Manzanita. Oh my gosh, that was the most fun trip. There was about a dozen of us, and we had the most amazing time walking around this old farm and hearing all about the farm history and how various community members from Akio Suimatsu and a number of the Filipino farmers and the Indofino families were all working there. But we also got to pick from over 100 varieties of dahlias.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just amazing. And then we walked down around the corner is Paulson's little farm stand, and he has organic eggs. You can hear the chickens going away all day, right? And he's got cucumbers, but he has a big hothouse with tomatoes, and they are the most delicious tomatoes I've had in a really long time. He has one kind called Fantastic, and it it really is.
Mm.
but that's just such a trip, and anybody can go. You know, you can just stop in, and the dahlias are like $1 a stem. The tomatoes are $5 a pound. It's fantastic. Lena?
I'm kind of taking on to that with the fruits and vegetables. Can we touch base a little bit on preserving fruits and vegetables this time of
I
year?
will talk about that in a minute, but one of the things I wanted to say about the dahlias was that they have 4 beds. One is this huge bed, one that's like, it looks like about 1.5 acres maybe. And then there are several others. And she said they call it the North Lake and the West Lake because the low fields get really soggy in the winter. So they have to dig all the dahlia bulbs. But at the senior center, we've got those dahlias that have been in the ground 3 years now. We've never dug them and done anything to them. And they don't even really get watered, and they're still going great. And that's one of the things to think about. If you have a dry enough spot, you can grow dahlias and not have to dig them up. I've had some at the library that I've had in the ground for 15 years. And they
Wow.
just bloom and bloom and bloom and don't give up. But they also get very little water and no fertilizer. So it's like nice to know about some plants that really like the heat and aren't going to complain about it, right? And zinnias would be another one like that. But yeah, I did talk a little about preserving some things. And again, if you're actually preserving and you're going to go in for a big batch, not just make a little bit, the best thing you can probably do is go online and look at the extension agents have, like Kitsap County Extension has all kinds of safe tips for how to do canning properly and make sure you don't give anybody ptomaine or something. But if you're just doing a little for the family and you're using small amounts, I usually just freeze everything because it's easier. And one thing I have learned is that your best friend when you're freezing is that blue painter's tape. Because if you just stick that on the label and then write on the date and the year, because I was right like 8/15 and it's like, what year was that? Oh. Good to know, because sometimes you're rattling around in the back and you're just like, my kids used to accuse me of having the national blueberry collection because I always froze a ton of blueberries every year and then wouldn't use them all up, but I'd freeze some more, But yeah, you want to make sure you change them out pretty often. And this is a good time to kind of reorganize your freezer and find whatever has been lurking in the back and kind of pull it out and maybe see if it still qualifies. My mom used to put stuff in the freezer and she'd write on the top, casserole needs work. And you go, if nobody ate it the first time, I don't think it's going to survive. Let's just be done with that, right? But yeah, I don't like to do a lot of canning in the summer when it's really hot. So I'll freeze, like I froze a whole bunch of blackberries, a whole bunch of raspberries, and a whole bunch of blueberries, and I'll make jam in the wintertime. I don't mind having the stove on, and everybody's thrilled to get some homemade jam, right? I can do it in November and do it for Christmas presents. But right now, I don't, I'm not into it. And if you have, like, I don't have a big freezer, I just have my fridge freezer, but you get those nice little containers, they all stack up really well. And it's better to keep your fridge and freezer full anyway. It's much more efficient and you're using less electricity that way. In fact, sometimes when I wasn't really doing much cooking, I'll actually put milk jugs full of water in there just to, in the fridge at least, because it's more efficient and you don't use so much electricity trying to heat air or cool air. I mean, than you do water holds temperature well. So it's a good way if you're a single person and you're not keeping that fridge too full. It's a good way to make sure your electric bills don't get out of hand.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
You're welcome. Another thing, a lot of people have fruit dryers or food dryers, and that is another really good way to do it if you like that kind of leather fruit or fruit leather. I haven't really been in love with it myself that much because a lot of times I find I get crazy about something and I do a whole bunch of dried something or other and then it never gets used because boy, talk about shelf stable, that stuff never changes year to year. But unless you love it, I'm going to say probably not the best way to preserve something if you really want to get some use out of it. Again, the thing I love about freezing is it doesn't get overcooked, whatever you're looking at. I do oftentimes little later in the month, toward the end of August and middle of September, when it's really the end and the plug is coming out, That's when I would gather up the last of the tomatoes and I do a slow roast, again, 225, little avocado oil rubbed on, and just slow cook them, sometimes for 4 or 5 hours. And then those freeze really well. And again, they just add so much depth and body to a pasta sauce or a casserole or soup or stew. And freezing keeps them in perfect condition. And you can freeze really small amounts. That's the other thing I really like. As someone who's usually cooking for 1 or 2 people, I don't need to, thaw a quart. But a cup is perfect, or even a half a cup, right? So I use a lot of small jars. One thing I do like is Ball makes really good jar covers for canning jars. And they are plastic, but they're usable for many, many, many years. And they are really good to use in the freezer. And I think they keep the seal better in the freezer than the, I can get one. So this is what they look like. And they have 2 different sizes. They have big mouth and small mouth or whatever. And they keep their seal better. Sometimes metal in the freezer doesn't really hold the seal quite as well as you would want. These are great for that and for sealing all kinds of stuff. And you can wash them in the washing machine and the dishwasher. Yeah. And use them many, many, many times. So I found those are the ones I use. And that way you can use a lot of jars. Like if you get, I don't know, mayonnaise or mustard in a jar and you want to reuse it again, if it's the right size, you can use this kind of thing on it and just recycle that jar umpteen times like I do. It's perfect for jam jars. The small size fits a jam jar just right.
You're making me hungry.
Well, is it at lunchtime? It probably is. So Anita, you've been candying flowers, right?
Yeah, I did. I had some little Johnny jump ups. So my family was delighted with those. I found a pasteurized egg white at Trader Joe's. I looked all over for it and I was delighted to find it there, and liquid and not expensive. And then so I would get kind of a what do you call it? Just a system set up, conveyor belt sort of, and I dip the flour, and then the sugar soon gets, the egg white drips on the sugar. So, but I got pretty good at that too. Anyway, yeah, I have half a jar of little pansies sugared, and my grandson loves it. My daughter-in-law loves it, and I gave them some after they visited in a little jar to take home. And I went to visit, and we had a special celebration with champagne, and my daughter-in-law surprised me and put a little flower in the champagne. It was so pretty.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, you can use chamomile blossoms. You can use violets as well as pansies and Johnny jump ups. Little rosebuds. You can candy rose petals.
Okay.
Those are all they work like that. And one thing that works really good is putting it on there's some of those drying racks, not the kind with just bars, but they have like a little grid screen and small mesh. And that's good for small pieces like that. And then you get I think they call them a dredger. It's like a big shaker that you can use for flour if you're going to flour before you fry it or whatever, but you can use it with sugar. And that superfine sugar, if you can't find the superfine sugar, you can just put regular table sugar in your food processor and grind it for quite a long time, and it will become that superfine. And then you can shake it with the thing, and then with that dredger, and then let them dry, and then flip them over and shake the other side. And then you got them, they really dry well, which is nice. And they're fun to put on like a wedding cake or special birthday cake or something like that.
Yeah. I figured I shouldn't use powdered sugar. I thought that would probably be, I didn't know what I'd end up with. I didn't experiment. I just kept using the granulated sugar.
Yeah, the powdered sugar is granulated sugar, just ground to powder, but it does clump more. Whereas the granulated, if that's super fine, granulated sugar will crystallize, and that's kind of what you're going for. You can do that with ginger too. Like if you want to make your own crystallized ginger, you boil it in a simple syrup, and then dry it out and sprinkle it like that, and it will be a really nice little chewy, snacky thing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I've ground it up then and put it in muffins. I bake a banana gingerbread, and sometimes then taking candied ginger and put it in the Cuisinart and then put it into the dough is good.
Yeah, well, that sounds really yummy.
Yeah, that's a family favorite. I wanted to ask you, Anne, I've been going around collecting calendula petals
Mhm.
and then reading, oh, I couldn't believe how much, I'm always amazed at YouTube and how much information they go on and on about calendulas. And some said, I've been so compulsive about just using the yellow petals.
Mhm.
But it also said, actually, there's more nutrients in the leaves. And I didn't know, do you just use the petals?
I just use the petals, and that's for a couple reasons. I like the way that it works on my skin, but I also like the way it looks and smells. And when you use all the greens and stuff, it becomes sort of a whole different thing. Yeah, for my face, especially, which is what I have rosacea, among other things, and a little pollen season trigger. Sometimes I'll get a little patches of eczema around my eyes, which is not fun. And that stuff, I just make this very simple salve, which is organic coconut oil and an equal amount. So if I use a quart of organic coconut oil in a slow cook, what do you call this, crock pot on low, right? And then put in a quart, pretty well packed, a quart of just the petals.
It takes a long time to get a quart.
I don't know. I've got 3 quarts so far this year. I mean, if you just pick every day, and there's a ton of them at the senior center, and you're welcome to get those.
I've been doing that. Oh, excuse me. I've been getting them at the senior center, and also over at Reed's house. He said I could go there. But
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and then you want to snip those heads off, because they'll go to seed. And then the plants, once they go to seed, they think their job is done and they will stop blooming. But if you keep cutting the flowers off and don't let them form those seeds, then they'll keep blooming and blooming and blooming. And sometimes all winter long, depending on the year.
Wow. Okay.
And those calendula petals are good for a lot of things, but they're very healing for your skin. And I usually let that steep in the crock pot for like 3 or 4 hours. Now, one of my friends does it, and she does it like overnight. Now, hers comes out with a much stronger cooked smell and a much deeper color. I find a lighter, I'm just getting the good out of it, I think, just in that few hours. And then just strain it again through some muslin and put it in the compost. And then I've got this beautiful pale yellow, slightly fragrant salve that is great for so many things. My granddaughter had chafed wrists this winter she was always getting, wet in the snow and then rubbing with her wrists, and nothing was healing it. But I gave her a little pot of this. We made some together, and it cleared it right up, which, it's what it says, all the old tradition says it's really good for skincare.
Yeah. That's what's motivating me. My daughter is gluten intolerant and gets skin problems. So I thought it's worth a try.
Well, yeah. And, it's very unlikely, but she should just, if she has a lot of skin issues, you should always try just a little bit first.
Okay.
Like maybe on the back of your hand rather than shoving it on your face until you find out what it's going to do.
Yeah.
Right, Lena.
What you were just talking about, how do you pronounce that? Caligula?
Calendula.
Caligula.
Caligula was a Roman emperor who was
sorry. I think I'm hungry now. You're talking about you gave me, were so kind enough to give me a jar of it, me and my mom. Now we both noticed that it was sitting on our counters, and we noticed it with the warm weather, it was liquefying.
Yeah.
Is that okay, or do we need to refrigerate it, or
I do refrigerate mine because I just like the coolness on my face. But you'll find, like, if you got up in the morning at 3 a.m. or something, it would be solid again. It's it'll go back and forth just like any oil. But yeah, you don't want to put it through too many changes. So yeah, I usually keep it in the fridge.
Okay,
Sometimes I'll take a little teeny jar and put that in my purse or something, so I have it with me. Because I use that instead of chapstick sometimes, right?
yeah. Okay.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Another one you can do with that same recipe is rose petals. Again, you want
Mhm.
further organic, but you can make that a same kind of salve for your face or skin. And some people rub a
Mm.
little into their hair and let it sit for a while and then shampoo it out, and it makes your hair really glossy, which is nice. Um, but coconut oil is antiseptic too, and calendula petals. If you think of calendar, then calendula is easier to remember, and they're called calendula as the calendar flower in
Mm.
Latin because it blooms all year round in Europe where it's native.
And where do you get organic coconut oil?
Actually, you can get it at Safeway.
Oh, okay, okay,
No.
good to know.
But, if I think Town and Country probably has 5 kinds, right? If it's
Okay.
organic, it's
And-
organic.
Depending upon, how big a volume you want, Costco has
Oh,
organic coconut oil in a big container, big plastic container. And I just transferred into a glass container because I don't like anything that's going to touch my skin being in plastic for a long time.
right.
So that's
Exactly.
probably the best price, but yeah. Put
Yeah, I
that on
usually
the
get it-
list.
It usually comes in glass jars, which I prefer. And again, you can use one of these tops.
Mhm.
And I do keep stuff like that in the fridge just because. But when I make a batch, I'll make, a dozen small jars and I keep those in the fridge and then give those out to people.
Mhm.
But yeah, I probably make it 2 or 3 times a year. And the nice thing about the calendula petals too is like once they're dry, I can seal them up in one of those containers. They don't need to be refrigerated or frozen. They're just dry. And then I can make this stuff anytime I want to, right?
Mm.
I love, I make my own shampoo too with Castile soap. And sometimes I'll put, Dr. Bronner's, just plain,
Mhm.
Mhm.
because I have a lot of skin issues and I don't want to use a lot of stuff. But if you do a cup of Dr. Bronner's and then you add a tablespoon of organic cider vinegar and a tablespoon of avocado oil or whatever you want, and about a third of a cup of water, that makes the most creamy, wonderful, sudsy, beautiful shampoo. And I started making it, oh gosh, 25 years ago when a lot of my friends, for whatever reason, had chemo and were losing their hair. And it's really safe and good for sensitive skin. And so babies can use it, right? It's not baby shampoo as such, but it's really nice. And then you can put in your own if you want to do like, instead of just a third of a cup of water, you might steep some rosemary in water and then use that rosemary water.
Mm.
It's nice for your hair too. Or rose petals, you could make your own, like rose water, right? I like things like that where I know exactly where everything came from and I know what it is.
Mhm.
If you're putting it on your body, is your biggest organ, and it's the one that takes in the most influence from all sorts of things in the world, right? So good to know what we're putting on your face and on your scalp and on your skin anyway, right?
Amen.
Well, yeah, we did say, if there was any more, if you wanted to talk about like what needs harvesting or anything like that. I was going to say, I've noticed a lot of, and I've been asked about, a lot of fruit trees are dropping fruit. They do that anyway. Like a lot of fruit trees are self-thinning and they're carrying a huge crop. If they got well pollinated, they'll just start dropping apples or whatever it is when there's too many for it to ripen properly. And a lot of times farmers will do that. Like they'll go through earlier in the season and they'll do it with grapes too, and like thin the crop so that you get good size, well matured, well ripened fruit and not a whole bunch of small, undersized, not as flavorful, right? Just like you might do that with your tomatoes about this time of year, starts cutting back those adventurous arms and saying, yeah, you're not going anywhere. Let's just concentrate on the job at hand. Finish what you started, right? But a lot of times the dropped fruit, if they're good and they've just been dislodged by wind or something, that's when you want to make something like applesauce or pear butter or peach butter or something like that, or cut them up and freeze them. Again, one thing that's fun to do if you have space in your freezer is to freeze them in a pie dish. And I'll rub the pie dish with a little oil and then fill it with the fruit and freeze it like that, right? And you can put your flour and stuff in there, whatever you use, and then freeze it solid and take it out and then put it in a container, like stack them in with wax paper between. And then when you're ready to make a pie, you just get your crust out, slap one of those puppies in there, bake it off, and boom, you're done. And they store pretty good because they're flat, right?
That was a lot of information, a lot of great information, Miss
Mhm.
Ann. Thank you so much. A lot of good questions. And
This
I'm
is so
sure,
much fun.
yeah, when people view this, you're probably going to get a lot of outside questions too coming your way from this. So
I do
this
get
has
them
been
after,
really-
right? Because it's like people are busy and I get that. And so they're not watching. Then they said, oh, well, you said this. What about that? And so then I
Exactly.
remember and write it down so I can answer you this next time, right?
Right, right. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Miss Ann, and thank you everybody for coming.
Mhm.
And
Yes, really, thank you.
yes, I'm going to have to go over my notes as well, so I may come to you with a few questions after this. But thank you again so much. This was a really
You
great
are
great
welcome.
conversation.